I got a question for y'all. Do you love farming sims? Because I do. In fact, I've been a fan of the genre ever since I first played Harvest Moon 64 back in the day. And it seems like lately, we're seeing a bit of a renaissance for the genre, with many studios big and small getting in on the act. There have been some wonderful titles that have come out in recent years that have brought fresh new ideas to the farming sim genre. And it's made me want to go back to its roots to see where it all began. To start at the beginning and follow it game by game and see how it evolved and changed over time. It'll also provide me with a good excuse to go back and play some of the titles I haven't touched in over a decade, or the ones I missed altogether. So that's what I intend to do. But first things first, what even is a farming sim? The genre is a bit of an odd duck to try and define. It's a simulation game, sure, but it's very different from the likes of, say, SimCity or Roller Coaster Tycoon. Rather than an omnipresent conductor controlling things from a removed perspective, the player is instead a character within the world who interacts with it directly. It has a social aspect, and players are encouraged to make friends with and even romance the NPCs around town. But it's not a dating sim. It's a bit of a life sim, but it's completely different from The Sims. Farming sim games also have overlap with titles like Animal Crossing or the more recent Disney Dreamlight Valley, but are still distinctly different. Really, even calling them farm sims stems from the fact that for about 2 decades, from 1996 to 2016, the only name in the game was Harvest Moon, and Harvest Moon was about farming. But more recent games like the My Time At series have come out, which don't have a focus on farming, but I would still argue fit snugly within the genre. Farming sims are, in essence, a combination of a job simulator as well as a social and life sim, often with bits of crafting and/or RPG-style elements. Many of these games share overlapping themes about community and living alongside nature. In trying to define the genre, I've come up with 5 pillars of what I believe makes a Harvest Moon-like farming sim. These are as follows. Number 1. Working a small, local trade that defines the player character. This is usually farming and ranching, obviously, but can extend to other trades, such as the builder role in the My Time At series. This is the meat and potatoes of the gameplay, and your daily routine will often circle around the core job in one way or another. Number 2. Socialization. Making friends with the NPCs in town is a big component of the game. Every NPC has their own weekly schedule, likes, dislikes, and so on. Learning these is a big part of the gameplay, and depending on who you want to befriend, has a big impact on how you might spend each in-game day. And of course, there are benefits to making friends with each character, most notably romance and marriage. Number 3. Resource gathering. On top of your trade work and socializing, you'll be spending a lot of time gathering resources, be it foraging for wild plants to use as gifts, ingredients, or just to earn a little extra scratch, or mining and chopping wood to gather materials for upgrading machines and buildings. This often coincides with the thematic element of living in and alongside nature. Number 4. Time management. Game time relies on an in-game clock, with each day lasting a set amount of minutes, thus implementing a certain level of strategy to the game. Since time is limited, players must consider how they will spend their days. What is the best use of their time? How can they best balance the previously mentioned work, socializing, and resource gathering? How will these plans change when, say, the weather is bad or there's a holiday or event? And number 5, story. These games have a set story to follow, even if small, that serves as the why to the gameplay, as opposed to the more casual sandbox or sim-style games. NPCs, too, have their own distinct stories and backgrounds, which goes hand in hand with the socialization aspect of the games. Often, the themes in these games center around growing or revitalizing a small, tight-knit community, while living harmoniously alongside nature. It might not be perfect, trying to define a genre rarely is, and this list could be subject to change down the line, but for now, this is what I'm working with. With that out of the way, let's talk about Harvest Moon on the SNES. Harvest Moon, known as Bokujo Monogatari, or Farm Story in Japan, was the brainchild of producer Yasuhiro Wada. In the mid-90s, with one co-producer credit under his name for the game Magical Poppin', he was looking to pitch his next title and wanted to create something a little different. In an interview for Retro Gamer magazine, he explains, quote, "I wanted to make something that hadn't existed before. At the time, it seemed like games were all about fighting or competition. So I decided to make a game without fighting and without competition. Sim games weren't exactly new, of course. Maxis alone was pumping out SimCity, Sim Earth, Sim Ant. Hell, they even had their own farming game called, you guessed it, Sim Farm. Riveting. But Wada wanted to make something different, even from those. Taking inspiration from growing up in the countryside of Kyushu, he sought to recreate the feeling of living in a small, rural community. A game where one can live out the relaxed, day-to-day life in the country, taking care of the farm, making friends in the local community, and exploring nature. He also found inspiration in the game Derby Stallion, a game series about the raising and racing of competition racehorses. The games mix part business simulation, part farm or animal care simulation, and even have a dash of RPG elements in there. Wada liked the idea of raising animals, like in Derby Stallion, but moved the setting to the countryside, like his hometown. In a GDC conference, he explains, quote, "I already knew this was going to be a life sim type game, but I wanted to avoid a sim where values were shown just in numbers, and that's just what you had to control. I wanted to create an experience where the player character could actually come in contact with the elements in the game and see the results." Thus, the concept for Harvest Moon was born, and Wada and his team set to work. However, despite what Wada and his team saw as a solid concept, putting it into practice was an uphill battle. A game like Harvest Moon had never been made before, and the team quickly found they had a pacing issue. See, without the gameplay loop of combat and growth, like in RPGs, or the intense system management of other Sims, they found the game felt lacking, monotonous. It lacked a sense of growth or pacing. The solution? Well, farming. Specifically the growing and harvesting of crops. Different seeds for different seasons would provide variety for the player, and watching those crops grow would be a good visual indication of the player's progress. The cycle of planting, watering, and harvesting those crops also added a good pace and a day-to-day gameplay loop. However, as the team added more and more to the game, they ran into a new problem: technical issues. Despite being a simple game, it had a lot of items and assets to manage, and when tested, the game's frame rate would drop. Taking items and actions back out of the game would obviously alleviate this issue, but could put the team right back at square one with a boring, monotonous game. Compromises had to be made. The art style was scaled back, and assets were made more simple so as to be easier on the system. The team got clever in reducing the amount of assets by first removing them from areas of the game that were less important, or largely wouldn't be seen. Continuous tweaking and adjusting like this slowly led the team to a balance, where the game had enough to keep the world alive and busy without it bogging down the system. Of course, these are all pretty standard issues in the world of game creation, and one that any developer is going to run into. The real blow came 2 years into development, when their original publisher, Pack-In Video, went bankrupt, which would eventually lead to a merger with Victor Entertainment, a subsidiary of JVC Kenwood. A bit of an odd acquisition, perhaps. JVC Kenwood is a Japanese electronics company, and Victor Entertainment was largely known for producing and distributing music, movies, and some anime. They were perhaps best known for their work with Japanese bands and pop idols, but had decided to dip their toes into the video game industry in the late 80s. Now, while this merger kept the game afloat, Wada's team saw substantial cutbacks. Not only was their budget slashed, but the original team of 10 was all but dissolved, leaving only 3 members to complete the game. But complete it they did, and the original Bokujo Monogatari was released on August 9th, 1996 for the Super Famicom. Those who know their Nintendo history will notice that's less than 2 months after the release of the N64, which hit Japan in June of 1996, making for a bit of a crowded market. The game would initially sell roughly 20,000 units, a somewhat meager number when you consider that the top 54 best-selling SNES games of all time cracked 1 million sales. Still, reviews of the game were good, and as more people learned about it, either from those reviews or word of mouth, the game would eventually break 100,000 sales. And that's not too shabby for a niche little title coming out late into the SNES's lifetime. After that, it would be picked up and published for the overseas market in North America and Europe. Here in the States, it would be published by Natsume Inc., who would change the name to the Harvest Moon many of us are familiar with. Remember that detail, it will be important in a much later video. Notably, the European version of the game would get completely different box art. Some say they find it beautiful or cozy even. Others find it haunting. Your mileage may vary. While the game never became a massive hit, it was well reviewed and well liked amongst the audience that found it. So, what is the game actually like? Well, the basic premise is that you've inherited your grandfather's old, dilapidated farm and decide to move into the countryside to revive it. And the place has certainly seen better days. The barn and chicken coop are empty, the field is full of weeds, rocks, and old tree stumps, and your house is basically a shack. On your first day, you're taken into town to meet everyone, and in an effort to make sure you familiarized yourself with said town, the game doesn't let you return home until you've greeted every single NPC. The offerings in town are somewhat slim, consisting almost exclusively of the necessary shops and amenities. You have the flower shop, where you can buy both crop and grass seeds, along with flowers to use as gifts. Nina and her mother live here, and it's where you'll be gifted the watering can tool. There's the church, where some characters will gather on Sundays. Its biggest use is the book in the top right corner, where you can check the dates of seasonal holidays. And if that seems like an odd place to put that function, it is. The priest of the town, and maybe this small child presumably live here? Somewhere. The mayor's home, where he, his wife, and their daughter Maria live, acts as the only standalone home in town, seeing as all the other characters live where they work. Its only real functionality is being the place where Maria's diary is kept. More on that later. The bar, which only opens at night, is a way to talk to certain characters after hours. The bartender and Eve live here, with Eve being the main draw to the establishment for the player, though some of the NPCs can sometimes give the player useful tips if spoken to. Next is the bakery, where Ellen, her father, mother, and pet bird live. You can buy cakes here to give as gifts to the local bachelorettes. The tool shop, where you can purchase a small selection of tools that you'll need around the farm, such as the animal brush, milker, and sprinkler. Anne and her father live here. After that is the livestock shop, run by Ellen's uncle. This is where you can both buy and sell livestock, along with other animal necessities like feed and medicine. There's the fortune teller's house, where said fortune teller and her granddaughter live. Her book can help provide the players with various hints and tips. And finally, the peddler's shop. He shows up only on weekends and will buy produce at a slightly higher rate than average, as well as occasionally sell special items, most importantly the blue feather. Again, more on that later. Now, once you've greeted everyone, you're allowed to go home and sleep, then begin your first day. Upon waking up and walking outside, you're greeted by a dog. Ellen, the only bachelorette who is conspicuously missing from town the day before, comes chasing after it. She ends up giving you the dog, which will live on your farm from that point on. One of the first things you'll notice once you're let loose is that the days are short. Really short. Each in-game hour is roughly 15 seconds in real time, meaning each day is about 3 minutes long if uninterrupted. Though it's potentially shorter if you pass through the crossroads multiple times, as each time you leave the crossroads screen, an hour automatically passes. That's not a lot of time to get things done, so you'll need to be strategic with how you plan out your days. You also won't initially have a way to actually check what time it is. Instead, you'll have to watch for the way the light changes throughout the day, and when your character stops momentarily to eat, signaling noon. Despite that frantically short time, the game does provide you with a bit of grace. For starters, time doesn't pass while you're indoors. Whether it's your house, a shop, or your barn, time is effectively frozen as long as you're in a building. That means no wasting in-game time taking care of your animals so long as they're in the barn or coop. It also doesn't pass whenever a dialogue box is open. Secondly, time effectively freezes after 6 p.m. and remains at 6 p.m. until you go to bed and start a new day. Now, you might think this is an easy exploit, allowing you to sell almost infinite produce at night. However, anything put into the shipping bin after 5 p.m. will not last until morning, and is basically wasted. So you have to make sure you ship everything you want in a day before 5 p.m. rolls around. And also bear in mind that, excluding the bar and its occupants, all other shops close and the characters go to bed at night, meaning you can't use the extra time to socialize with most of them. All shopping and bachelorette wooing, save for Eve, needs to be done during the day. You can, however, use nighttime for other chores that would otherwise be very time-intensive. It's a great time to actually plant or water your crops, clear your field, or go and chop wood. Your only limit is how much stamina you have, and with the hot spring's ability to refill that stamina, you can stay up working as late as you want. Along with the time of day, you'll need to keep track of the days and seasons, as well as the aforementioned player stamina. A year in Harvest Moon SNES is 4 seasons long, showcasing the standard spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Each season is about a month long, 30 days in total. If you lose track of the days, you can check your house's calendar or press the select button to see exactly what day it is. Your stamina, on the other hand, is a completely hidden value. By default, you start with 100 points of stamina, and each use of a tool, such as chopping wood with an axe or watering crops, uses a bit of that stamina. If you run out, your character will collapse. Much like the time of day, you'll have to pay attention to how tired your character is getting, and either stop working for the day or replenish some stamina by eating, or, as mentioned, using the mountain hot spring. You can increase your stamina via power berries. These are special fruits that you can receive through a variety of means, some simple and some more obtuse. Each berry is worth 10 points of stamina, and there are 10 berries in the game, meaning you can raise your total stamina from 100 to 200. Acquiring all power berries is also a key factor in what ending you get. But moving on, your new old farm is a mess, and you'll likely spend your early days cleaning up the various debris around the field. Rocks need to be smashed, wood needs to be chopped, and weeds need to be cut. You'll need a different tool to accomplish each of these tasks, which can all be found in your tool shed. In that same GDC conference mentioned earlier, Wada explained that he found inspiration for those tools in the item system from The Legend of Zelda on the NES. Bombs and fire, for example, would allow the player to interact with the environment by making holes in rocks or burning down trees to find secrets. Thus, a set of farming tools could be used for the player to interact with and change the environment in Harvest Moon. The game by default provides you with the basic set of 5 tools. The hammer, the axe, the hoe, and the sickle are all in your tool shed at the start of the game, and the watering can is gifted to you by default when you're saying your hellos around town. Any new tools you acquire will later automatically be stored in the shed as well. As you grab these items to begin your work, you'll notice the first quirk of this game. You can only hold 2 tools at a time. When holding 2 tools, say the axe and hammer, you can switch between them by pressing the X button. However, if you want to trade that hammer out for the sickle, you'll have to return to the shed to do so. With how short the in-game days are, this means you'll need to be strategic in what tools you're carrying around at any given time, so as not to waste precious seconds on a detour to the shed to switch them out. For example, if you know the first thing you want to do in the morning is care for your animals, then you should make sure to have your tool and milker in your tool set when you go to bed the night before, so you can go directly to the barn in the morning without stopping at the shed first. So you've got your farm, you've got your tools. How do you actually begin to make, money? Well, the first and most obvious answer is planting some crops. And I'd actually recommend you do this on the first playable day so you can get those crops going as soon as possible. In the spring, you have 2 crops available to you, that being potatoes and turnips. Each costs 200 gold, and with only 300 in your pocket to start, you'll have to choose between the 2. Potatoes take 6 days to grow and sell for 80 gold, while turnips take only 4 days to grow, but in turn only sell for 60 gold. Pro tip, buy the potatoes first. See, the game starts on a Tuesday, meaning neither crop will be ready to sell before the weekend. And since shops are closed on the weekends, you won't be able to buy new seeds until Monday, so you might as well use the extra days to get the money from potatoes. Spring crops don't regrow, meaning once you harvest them, you'll need to buy and plant a whole new plot. You can get into a pretty good cycle of planting and harvesting spring crops where you have something to harvest every day, if you desire. But remember that doing so does cut into your time, so plan wisely if there are other things that you want to do around town or in the mountain. When summer comes around, you'll have your choice between corn and tomatoes. Both cost 300 gold for a bag. However, tomatoes take only 7 days to grow and sell for 100 gold, while corn takes 11 days to grow but sells for 120 gold. Unlike spring crops, however, both corn and tomatoes regrow after 3 days, meaning you can continue to harvest the same plot all season long. You'll need to be mindful of how you plant your crops depending on if you're planting spring or summer crops, so you can get the best bang for your buck while also making watering them as streamlined as possible. Let me explain. See, each bag of seeds will sow 9 tiles in your field in a 3x3 square. That's easy enough to water while they're still seeds and you can walk over them, but once they sprout, the plants will have collision. Since your watering can only water one tile directly in front of you, you won't be able to water that center plant. Not the biggest deal for spring crops, you can simply continue to water and harvest it once the outer crops have been pulled, but you'll be out of luck with the summer crops. While you still only have the watering can, you're free to plant all 9 squares and simply ignore the center one, or you can leave the center square untilled so it will remain empty. However, once you acquire the sprinkler, this formation with one center edge square left empty will be the most optimal for summer crops, allowing you to water 8 squares in just 2 uses of the sprinkler. If you place 2 of these plots back to back, you can water all 16 squares in just 3 uses of the sprinkler. You can and will need to also plant grass, but we'll touch on that in a minute. Now just remember to water them every day and boom, you got vegetables. Of course, once you begin to harvest them, you'll notice the next little quirk this game has. Or rather, something it doesn't have. If you thought having only 2 slots for tools was limited, get ready for no slots for items. No pockets, no satchel, no backpack. Whatever you're carrying is in your hands, meaning you can only carry around one item at a time. This is rough, no way around it, especially when you're trying to harvest a large amount of crops or forage in the mountain. You can alleviate this a little once you get your horse, but that won't be until your first winter, so until then, it's slow going. I can't say I really know why this choice was made, whether it was a lack of foresight, lack of time, or some kind of effort for realism, but it certainly is one of the game's bigger downsides. But, moving on, let's talk about animals. Harvest Moon SNES offers just 2 kinds of livestock, chickens and cows. Eggs from chickens sell for only 50 gold, making them worth even less than the cheapest crop, the turnip. However, chickens and their eggs have a lot of benefits. Priced at 1,000 gold, they're a cheaper option than buying a cow, making them more accessible in early game. They're also completely free and convenient to breed. Simply place one of their eggs into the coop's incubator and wait. It'll take just 3 days to hatch, and then just another week to mature and begin laying eggs. This basically means you can buy 1 chicken and proceed to fill up the rest of your coop for free. And along with the money that they bring in, eggs also make a great gift for your wife once you marry. Your other livestock option, cows, cost a whopping 5,000 gold each, making them a little too steep for the very early game. They're also more expensive and time-consuming to breed. See, unlike chickens, which can be done for free, cows require the purchase of a miracle potion, which will run you 4,000 gold. And after that, it will take roughly 2 seasons for the calf to be born and grow up before it will begin to produce milk. You do get a slight affection bonus for calves that are born as opposed to bought, but all in all, it's generally more efficient to just buy a new cow. All that said, cows are much more profitable than chickens, with the small milk selling for 150 gold. And the more affection they have, the better quality milk they will produce, with a medium milk selling for 250 gold and a large selling for 350 gold. The medium bottle of milk also looks vaguely like a cow's face, and I just find that so stinking cute. Cows and chickens both eat fodder, which you get from cutting the grass you buy at the flower shop. They can also eat the animal feed that you purchase from the livestock dealer if you run out of fodder. After all, if your animals don't eat, they won't produce milk or lay eggs for a couple days. Cows may even become sick or lose happiness points, which will lower the quality of their milk, so it's best to bite the bullet and buy feed if you need to. But that's fairly pricey, especially if you have a sizable amount of animals, so grass is the better option. Grass can be planted in both spring and summer, and doesn't need to be watered. It will grow in 9 days, and once harvested with the scythe, will regrow in another 7. Grass can't be planted in fall, but any that's already planted will continue to grow for the season. And somewhat obviously, grass can neither be planted nor grow in the winter. Fodder can't be sold, but you probably won't want to anyway, since it's your livestock's main source of food. And ideally, you want to make sure you stock up enough to get you through winter. You need to have grass already growing on your farm before you can buy an animal from the livestock dealer. Each animal requires 16 squares of grass to buy either a chicken or a cow. And yes, that's fully grown grass, and it's per animal. So if you have, say, 1 chicken and only 18 squares of grass, or 36 squares but half of it isn't in its ready-to-harvest state, you can't purchase another animal. This grass-to-ratio animal is not enforced for breeding, however, only buying them. If your grass is fully grown and ready to cut, you can opt to let your animals out into the field to graze instead of cutting the grass and manually feeding them in the barn. But don't do that! For starters, this is a huge time suck. Remember, you can only carry one item at a time, meaning you have to milk each cow, then immediately run and drop the milk off into the shipping bin before moving on to the next. And your animals like to move around. It can be hard enough navigating to each of them in the barn when they keep moving, much less a large field. And unlike the barn, all that running back and forth outside is done while the clock is ticking. Moving your animals in and out of the barn and coop is also not done at the push of a button. You have to use the bell for the cows, which makes them walk towards you, but you still have to slightly guide and maybe even push them in or out of the barn. And chickens have to be carried in and out one by one. Again, all on the clock. Bear in mind, there's also the risk of wild dogs coming and stressing out your animals. See, if part of your fence is broken, then during the night, wild dogs will show up and pester any livestock outside. Scared cows won't produce milk for a couple days, and the dogs will just straight up eat your chickens. Oh, and chickens that are left outside simply won't lay eggs at all. Like, they just won't. I think this is technically a glitch in the game, but it is what it is, so yeah, just keep your animals inside. There are, of course, 2 other animals on your farm, that being your dog and your horse. As previously mentioned, you receive your dog automatically on your first playable day. He doesn't require feeding nor grooming, nor does he really serve too much of a purpose outside of being a good, handsome boy. Some sources online say he will prevent your fences from being broken or will chase wild dogs off at night, but that's not really true as far as I can tell. His main functionality is in regards to what ending you get. Yes, the game has multiple endings, and if you want the best one, you have to pick up your dog at least 100 times throughout the course of the game. The other animal is your horse. You can receive the horse as early as the first day of winter. Simply walk to the crossroads, and a cutscene will play of your character running across a stray foal, which they'll bring back to your farm. It will take about 21 days in total for your foal to mature into a horse, but once it does, you'll receive the saddlebags for it. These basically function as a portable shipping bin, making it much easier to harvest and ship crops in your field. The horse is locked to your farm, however, meaning you can't ride it into town or to the mountains, which is unfortunate because it would be really helpful in foraging there. Oh, and speaking of the mountains, this is the 3rd and final zone in Harvest Moon SNES. Going north at the crossroads, you'll step out onto the foot of the mountain. Here you'll find all manner of forageable items, tree stumps to cut, the hot springs, and a few remaining villagers who make their home here. First and foremost, you have the Carpenter's Lodge, where, obviously, the carpenter and his workers live. With the right amount of money and chopped wood, they'll upgrade your house. And pro tip, prioritize upgrading your house before the end of your first summer, as you'll get the clock as a gift from them. It won't be displayed in your UI, but if you press the select button, you'll be told what time it is, which is incredibly helpful. Next, you have the fisherman, who makes his home in the little tent next to the pond. He'll be out on sunny days in spring, summer, and autumn, and will offer to let you borrow his fishing rod. Fish sell for 300 gold, making them a good source of extra money in the early game. Lastly, Eve's grandfather lives here, and you can often find him hanging out in different parts of the mountain. There are also a couple notable locations on the mountain, such as the cave, which has some herbs you can forage, and a power berry that will taunt you for ages until you can finally access it. There's a blocked-off goddess pond, which, again, will sit there taunting you. Both the goddess pond and access to that power berry become available after an earthquake in your first winter. It's just a matter of waiting until that happens. To the north of the map, you'll find the hot spring, which can restore your stamina. Unlike later games where you have to actually sit in the water to slowly restore your stamina, this one will automatically restore a small amount as soon as you jump in. So, to restore more, the best method is to simply jump in and out of the hot springs multiple times in a row. Lastly, the topmost screen features the top of the mountain. There's generally not much to do here, except look out onto the lovingly rendered background. Seriously, it is actually rather pretty. But the area is host to a couple specific special events and holidays. And speaking of holidays, Harvest Moon SNES has only 6 festivals. There are 2 in spring, 2 in fall, and 2 in winter. Yeah, there are no festivals in summer, and I don't really know why. Maybe it's just too hot to want to go out and do anything. And as a Texan, I get it. These festivals are usually fairly simple, but offer the player a chance to interact with the bachelorette of their choice, or acquire a special item. Starting on spring 1st, you'll have the New Year's Festival, where villagers will gather at the summit of the mountain to watch the first sunrise of the year. Despite being the first festival on the calendar, it will actually be the last one the player interacts with, since you arrive in town on the 1st, but don't get free control until the next day. Next is the Flower Festival on spring 23rd. A holiday to honor the local harvest goddess, it's an opportunity to give gifts to the bachelorettes and choose one to dance with. It's also your first chance to buy the Sea of Snowflower for 2,000 gold, which I recommend you do. On fall 12th, you have the Harvest Festival. Bring something like a crop or fish to put into the soup, and if it's good, you'll be rewarded with a power berry. This festival also offers you a second chance to dance with the bachelorette of your choice. The Egg Hunt is on fall 20th, and like the name implies, it's a minigame where you hunt for certain colored eggs around town. Should you win, you'll receive a reward from the mayor. Next, winter 10th is Thanksgiving Day. Unlike what us Americans might think of when we hear Thanksgiving, this holiday functions a bit more like White Day, with the bachelorettes around town who like you giving you cakes. Lastly, winter 24th is the Star Night Festival, where you can watch the stars with the bachelorette you like, or your wife once you're married. Each girl watches from a different location, so you'll need to speak with them beforehand to know where they'll be. As you can see, the benefit of many of these festivals is to socialize with the villagers and spend time with the bachelorette of your choosing. So let's talk about them. There are 5 eligible bachelorettes in the village. That's Eve, Nina, Anne, Ellen, and Maria. You might have noticed they're the only characters I've called by name so far, and that's because they're the only characters in the game with names. All other villagers are known only by their title, job, or relation to said bachelorettes. And, okay, technically the main character and dog have canon names, that being Pete and Coro, but when you can name yourself whatever you want in-game, I say it only half counts. Bachelorettes are also the only characters with whom you can raise affection. Talking with other villagers is largely for flavor text or the occasional hint, but they don't have friendship levels like other games down the line. Each of the bachelorettes have distinct personalities and fit somewhat snugly into different archetypes, which we'll see get used often throughout the Harvest Moon franchise. Starting off, you have Ellen. Down to earth and with a bit of a girl-next-door vibe, Ellen is a lover of animals and often spends time with her uncle, the livestock dealer. There's Nina, the daughter of the flower shop owner. Nina's a sweet, flower-loving, girly girl who can be a bit airheaded and sometimes talks in the third person. I married her, by the way, because I love me a pink-haired girl. You have Anne, the tomboy inventor in town. Anne prefers to spend her time tinkering with various machines, though she seems to have little success in making anything that actually works. Then there's Maria, the daughter of the mayor. Maria is shy and soft-spoken and seems quite pious, choosing to spend most of her time helping around the local church.
I want a church girl that go to church and read your Bible.
And lastly, you have Eve, who lives and works at the bar. Eve is the beauty of the town and comes off as flirty and confident, but hides a secret insecurity. All bachelorettes appreciate approximately the same gifts. That's going to be crops, cakes, flowers, and produce. Some just like certain items more than others. For example, all girls like flowers, but you'll receive more affection points from Nina if you give her a flower than you will with Anne. In order to eventually get married, you have to raise a bachelorette's affection. You do this by talking with them every day, bringing them gifts, and spending time with them at those aforementioned festivals. Occasionally, a girl will ask the player a question, and answering correctly will give you a bit of bonus affection. This can actually be used to cheese the game at times. See, by entering a building or other room, then returning to reload the area, you can have the girl ask the question again. If the bachelorette is inside a building when she asks you a question, such as Eve in the bar or Anne in her house, then you can easily go between rooms and raise her affection over and over without losing any time in the day. If you want to actually see how much a girl likes you, you'll have to find their diary and read it. Like the weird little creep you are. Each diary is found in their bedroom, usually next to their bed, and displays a set number of hearts representing how much she likes you, with 10 hearts being the highest. When a bachelorette reaches 4 hearts, if the player is still single, you will be able to witness her heart event. Most of these are some flavor of the girl losing something or becoming lost herself, and you needing to go find them. While these are meant to offer a little further insight into the character and show growth between them and the player, I personally think they all kind of blend together in how similar these events are. Once you reach 5 hearts, the peddler who shows up on the weekends will begin selling the blue feather, a gift used to propose to the girl of your choosing. I always like the blue feather. See, Harvest Moon tries to go for a setting that's familiar but not really specific to any one place. It's inspired by little alpine villages, but there's also obvious Eastern influence in there too. The blue feather is a cute way to propose to someone without it being tied to any one cultural practice. Your house must have at least the first upgrade, and you have to propose on a weekend for the girl to accept. But once she does, you'll be married that day. Another cute detail I like is that every bachelorette has a unique wedding dress. After marrying, your wife will move in with you and will change her look to a more homely style. Unlike the unique wedding dresses, every bachelorette will wear the same dress and hairstyle after getting married, with the only difference between them being their hair color. I'm personally not the biggest fan of that choice, but hey. Your wife will at least have a different schedule around the farm depending on which girl you married. Nina, for example, will hang outside the barn doing laundry, whereas Anne will be in the tool shed tinkering with her inventions. I mentioned earlier the act of giving eggs as gifts to your wife, and the reason to do so is twofold. First, being able to marry at just 5 hearts means you still have another 5 hearts to go, so eggs are a good way to continue to raise that affection. But you can also lose affection. If you come home late after your wife has already gone to bed, you'll lose a couple affection points. Do this too often and lower your wife's affection enough, and she can actually leave you and return to her parents' home, where you'll have to go and find her to reconcile. If you plan to stay out late, giving your wife gifts is a good way to counteract that affection loss. The next step in growing your family is to have a child, which, just like getting married, has a couple requirements. First, your wife's affection level has to be up to 7 hearts, and you'll need the second and final house upgrade, which gives you both a crib and a child's bed. You can have either a boy or girl, though the only difference between the two is a change in pronouns when referring to them. Your child will even age to some extent. When your child is born, it will be a baby sleeping in its crib, but will eventually begin crawling. After that, it will age into a walking toddler, and will wear this really cute cow onesie. Once at toddler age, your wife can have a second child, which will follow the same aging as the first. Both children do appear to be able to grow into toddlers, but won't age beyond that. Not that that last bit matters much, seeing as you'll likely be nearing the end of your first game by the time you have 2 children. The game ends at 2.5 years, at the end of your 3rd summer. That feels like an odd place to stop, and yet, like it's the appropriate place to do so. 2 years would risk being a bit too short, but by this point in the game, things were really starting to drag, and a full 3 years would have felt far too long. On your last day, you'll be judged on how well you did, and what you did or did not accomplish. And yes, there are different endings depending on these factors. A surprising amount even. Everything from complete failure to a couple bachelor endings and even a perfect ending. The endings themselves aren't all that long, but it's a nice touch to include so many to reflect the player's choices and accomplishments in-game. And then it ends. Unlike other farm sims, which can basically be played ad infinitum, Harvest Moon SNES stops after the credits and final cutscene, and you'll have to start a new file to play more. And that's basically it. I didn't cover every tiny minutia of the game. I didn't want this to become practically a guide, but those are at least the main points. So, what do I think overall? Honestly, it's a good start. There's a reason this game got good reviews and garnered enough of a fan base to turn it into a long-running series. It's charming and cute, and certainly unique for the time. Like many games of the era, it features lovely and expressive pixel art, with a good eye for detail. I especially love how the main character sprite is asymmetrical, and the direction of things like his hair or bandana actually change depending on if you're facing up or down. And I mean, just look at those cows. That's perfection. That's a real S-tier cow right there. Real primo shit. The music can be a bit of a mixed bag. I won't lie, some of it can get a little repetitive and grating after you've heard it over and over, but at the same time, it has personality. Most tracks try to have at least one emulation of a real-life instrument, be it the flute in the autumn theme or the French horn in the mountain theme. They worked hard to make each track represent the feeling of the current season or location. And there's some genuinely good tracks in there too, such as the mountain or the town theme. The overall atmosphere in the game is cozy and laid back. The setting, as previously mentioned, is inspired by small alpine villages. It's quaint and largely down to earth, though it sprinkles in some more fantastical elements, such as the harvest goddess and sprites. It gives the whole game a very nowhere yet everywhere all at once kind of setting, a place that feels familiar despite being no one place in particular. And the gameplay systems are mostly well thought out, offering multiple different crop options per season that grow and sell at different rates, as well as 2 livestock options that also produce and sell at different rates, offers the player a bit of choice and even strategy to their decisions. Do you favor one crop over another? Cows over chickens? What's the best way to earn money? Which benefits the ending you're going for? And of course, those multiple endings, which give some payoff to the choices and accomplishments you made in-game, as well as incentive to replay the game. That said, it is far from perfect. In terms of the characters, while charming, they are all a little bit flat. While there are hints of there being more complexity amongst the characters, such as Ellen's father clearly being the town drunk, don't expect the game to get into any terribly rich storytelling, especially outside of the 5 bachelorettes. The game also lacks a bit of variety. I know I just praised how the different crops and livestock give the player some choice, but that selection is also kind of lacking. But it goes beyond that too. Both autumn and winter really suffer from a lack of things for the player to do. Winter most of all. Without any crops in those seasons, half of your usual farm work is gone, and outside of one-time events in those seasons, or the festivals, there aren't really other activities to keep you occupied. No mining, no cooking, no crafting. You can still fish in autumn, but there's only one kind of fish, so it's really only to earn a little extra money. And winter suffers the most, with even fishing, foraging, and grass growing going away. I won't lie, I found myself caring for my animals, then going directly to bed more often than not in winter, just to get through it. You also quickly run out of things to do. Obviously, you have your usual daily chores like milking your cows, but I'm talking about long-term goals. Of course, every farm sim will reach a point where you've seen all the game has to offer, achieved everything you want to achieve. Even dense games like Stardew Valley have a limit as to what's in the game. But it can take players hours upon hours to accomplish those different goals and see all there is to see in the game. Not so much for Harvest Moon SNES. Pretty early into my second year, I had more than enough money and nothing to buy. Unless, of course, I wanted more livestock and crops to make the days even longer to get through. I was married with a wife at full affection, so outside of talking to her once a day, I had little to do there. The last 4 seasons were the hardest, with me just largely trying to get through it as quickly as possible. It frankly started to put me to sleep, and I actually took 2 naps in the course of doing it, which, yes, my partner laughed at me for, which honestly, fair. And of course, the lack of an inventory makes the daily tasks that much more tedious. I know all of that sounds kind of negative, and like Harvest Moon on the SNES isn't a terribly good game, but that's not true. It's rough around the edges, sure, but I genuinely think it was and still is a pretty solid start to the franchise. Sometimes you go back and look at the first game in a series and you almost wonder how it evolved into what it is today. But Harvest Moon has always been Harvest Moon, and its identity was cemented firmly with the first game. It's lovely and charming, and while I wouldn't recommend it as someone's first farming sim, for those who already love the genre, I think it's a great game to check out. If you've played Stardew Valley, then you've probably already noticed just how much of that game was inspired by Harvest Moon on the SNES, and there's a reason for that. It's a solid start and massively influential title in the genre, and I love it. So that was Harvest Moon on the SNES. I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least found it a little entertaining. If you're new here, welcome, and thank you for watching my video. If you're a returning subscriber, you might be wondering what's going on, and Honestly, I just wanted to give this channel a bit of a revamp after a long hiatus. I still will do some spooky game stuff, but it's gonna be a bit more of a catch-all for anything I want to do or talk about. So I hope you're here for that. Again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.